We are officially recording, and I'm going to share the screen here. Is everybody seeing the screen successfully? All right, Ken, take it away.
I want to welcome everybody to our spotlight. This being Black History Month, we wanted to take the opportunity to highlight some extraordinary architects. Our speaker for tonight is Burt Pinnock, and Burt has an extraordinary history. And I'm just going to touch on a couple of things that that he's done, and hopefully everybody will have a chance to hear him speak and elaborate on some of his history and some of the wonderful projects that he has going on. As you may know, Burt is the head of Baskervill Design. It's a great architectural firm in Richmond, and Burt's passion for design has created award-winning work for countless communities, from historic sites and cultural institutions to forward-thinking companies and inspiring foundations. With a firm grasp on contextual design, Burt's work is rooted in the belief that architecture can provide solutions and change to cultural challenges. His approachable attitude and friendly smile have opened many doors as both a speaker and design leader. And of course, today we're going to hear him as a speaker. He's a chairman of the Commonwealth of Virginia's Art and Architectural Review Board, and is co-founder of Storefront for Community Design, among other volunteer engagements. For Burt, architecture and design isn't a job, it's his personal contribution to the well-being and vitality of our communities. Burt went to Virginia Polytech and received his Bachelor of Architecture, and he is principal and chairman of the board of Baskervill. And so without any further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Burt, and Burt will let us know about his achievements and the great person he is. Take it away, Burt.
Thank you, Ken. And again, thanks for inviting me to chat. And it's nice to see some familiar names up here and colleagues that I serve with in various places and have worked with, and continue to inspire me. So I'm gonna pull up my deck here that hopefully everyone is seeing and makes sense. And I'm going to start with my colleague and friend Kevin Jones of Virginia Tech asked me to speak a while ago, and he titled the talk "Seeing and Being Seen," and I thought this was appropriate for this conversation this month and with this group. My predecessor as chairman of the board, Brent Farmer, gave me a book when I was first an intern at Baskerville called "The Old Way of Seeing," and it sort of espoused on the lost idea of architecture as we once knew it. I put that into question a lot on how we see things, but I think it is also an idea of how we're seen. So I want to just quickly tell you where a little bit of background. Right, I'm born 1964 in Tuskegee, Alabama, and I'm of an age in an era where I think I was maybe still on the edge of being colored before I was Negro, before I was African American, and there's an Afro-American in there too, and then I was Black, and then, but I'm gonna just say this: white people always been white. People of color have been, so, you know, I think we're still working it out, but it is a question of maybe how we are seen. And in recent years, I would say, is start to frame how I see things. But as Ken said, yeah, I'm currently chairman of the board and a principal at Baskervill, and it's a fantastic group of folks, and it was a journey getting there. I really have only had in the United States anyway, 2 jobs: Baskervill, BAM Architects for 15 years, and Baskervill again. So in the 30 plus years professional practice, these are the 2 jobs I've had. But I did have the fortune to sort of work in other countries and have other ways of seeing that are not rooted necessarily here. Baskervill is 140 people. We practice in a number of markets across pretty much all states and in other countries, and continuing to grow. And it's a firm that has I think a DNA of pension that is designed to really serve a multitude of clients and project types and locations and people. And I'm very proud of the work that we do and get to do. And I also recognize that at 125 years old, the DNA of the firm comes from also things like the Art Deco MCV Hospital in Richmond, or the very classical Swannanoa and Scott House, and even additions to Thomas Jefferson's Capitol, right? Which is, I like just throwing that out there, that fact that as a young firm, Nolan and Baskervill, you know, I think the firm was less than 6 years old maybe when the commission to do the additions to the Capitol became a project. And like, that's okay, that's who this firm is. But it's also the firm that designed the Jefferson Memorial on Monument Avenue, right? And so there is sort of a understanding of what the DNA of the firm was and what we hope it will become. So doing this work really does ask the question of history, of who are the history tellers, right? Who's putting the framework together? What is the context? And I think most importantly, what is the implicit power of the storyteller? So in all of that, we start with the work here in my hometown of Richmond, Virginia, right? This map is 1886 Sanborn map. It's overlaid with some research done by many years ago, I should say. The red square is overlaid on the map, and the gray stripe is 95 as it passes through downtown Richmond. But the red squares are slave traders and auction houses as they were known to exist. And I say to people, it's if you did a Starbucks map of Seattle, Washington, it probably would look very similar to this, right? It is that sort of prolific. Yeah.
I apologize to interrupt. I don't think we're seeing
Yeah.
the map. We're still seeing the see and being seen slide.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Let's see.
Do you want us to turn?
What are you saying now?
Seen.
We're on the scene.
Okay. So you're seeing slide 2.
There's progress.
Slide 3
On a
and
number.
4. There we go. All right. Well, we'll do all of that. So here. Now we're all caught up. Okay, we're all caught up. Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is a map of research showing known slave traders and auction houses as they were in Richmond, Virginia, right? The gray stripe is 95. If you know Richmond, is Main Street Station. And I think the river's down just over here. This is a framework of the work that really has sort of become very prevalent in the studio that I lead. in the firm. So in that, one of the most profound and notorious slave traders was Robert Lumpkins. And so I started work with the Richmond Slave Trail Commission back in 2004-ish. And one of the first projects was the archaeological dig to understand where and if Lumpkins Jail actually existed. And on the right is a computer generation based on historical records, writings, narratives, and photographs that we could find of what that site might have looked like. And it's just part of a 2.5 mile long Richmond Slave Trail through Shackle Bottom in the city. I think as we have this this burgeoning national debate about what we should and should not be teaching in our schools or learning in our institutions of higher education. We have to really just adhere to the fact that there is the truth. History is not a fabrication. There are aspects of interpretation of history that may be fabrications, but the actual facts of history are just that. And we should know what they are. The Reconciliation Plaza along the Slave Trail is a project I have come to lean on a lot because it's a space in Richmond that truly functions as it was intended to, as a place of reconciliation. And I only point it out because the image on the lower left is when the murder of Heather Heyer had happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. And then Mayor Stoney and Delegate Dolores McQuinn, along with other civic leaders, had a moment of healing in this space. It's a small footprint of space, a corner, busy corner you see in Richmond, but it's become that space that speaks to a lot. So the current project for the Slave Trail is the new Slave Trailhead. So this project sort of has been going on for 2004 to 2022. I can't do higher math. Somebody help me out, but however many years that is, that's how long we've been working with the commission. So the trailhead will be the place where you start this walk along the James River that is really, if you can imagine it, the same path that the enslaved were led along the river as after they arrived in Richmond or were taken out of Richmond to be sold, quote unquote, downriver. And if you haven't done it, a docent-led tour, just at dusk is a really powerful thing. All of that work culminated in the idea of creating a National Slavery Museum in the city of Richmond. So that was idea came out of a lot of effort with the Richmond Slave Trail Commission, the city of Richmond, other stakeholders, and hopefully it is moving forward. We'd like to see it move forward soon. I think they're still in the master planning phase of the project. But this idea that we have established this site of conscience where the second largest domestic slave trade market in the country sort of was located. It's a powerful piece of history, and not a lot of people know it. I'm currently in Atlanta, Georgia, as I mentioned, working on another project in this same sort of space where I still am not amazed, but curious that these histories are not as known as I thought they would be. But the Black History Museum is another project in that space in Richmond. I think this is it's interesting that in 1899, this building was built with less than $10,000 and it was built for the Black Battalion of the city of Richmond. And I just, that's powerful thing, the former capital of the Confederacy, constructed for the Black Battalion, this armory, which is a stunning piece of architecture, and it's now home to the Black History Museum. The work in memorials began probably with certainly the reconciliation statute picked up more in this space with the Civil Rights Memorial at Capitol Square. When you get a phone call from the First Lady of Virginia and she says, would you engage in this project? I think you have to say, yes, of course. And putting a memorial on Capitol Square is sort of a daunting prospect in that at that time, there were, I think, there hadn't been a new memorial on the square. And so after some efforts by the Civil Rights Memorial Commission, this came to fruition. So the artist is Stanley Blytheville, that I think has since passed away, and is the sculptor. And so currently we're working on a number of these types of projects. After the murder of George Floyd, we all started a reckoning journey, I guess, maybe. Some of us had been on it longer than others. And in 2011, I believe it was, a group of institutions of higher education established a consortium, universities studying slavery. And there's currently over 60 universities that are members of this consortium, which all of them are at different spaces in this, but University of Virginia, of course, William and Mary, University of Richmond, Emory University, and others, Georgetown, George Mason, to understand what their relationship and responsibilities are and this reckoning with these histories. At the University of Richmond, this knoll in this photograph, and just everybody seeing the photograph, thumbs up. Yeah, okay. This knoll in this photograph is what remains of what was a burying ground. So a PhD student named Shelby Driscoll, doing her research, continued to put together documentation that revealed that this is the site of desecrated burying ground at the heart of the campus, University of Richmond, and that it had been desecrated over decades, over years, more than once. And at this point, the university has set its sights on to starting to rectify that wrong as it goes. So we've spent the last 24 months or so, because of COVID, sort of engaging not only with the university community, but with descendants of those who are expected or suspected to be in this burying space. And that led to what we call the community vision. All right, and it's where will they go forward with? And this is not a singular effort by the University of Richmond, but it's part of a holistic approach to its understanding, its relationship to these stories. So other educational programming, scholarship opportunities, so forth and so on, are all part of these narratives of our universities moving forward. And so that's where we are there. And as I said, currently I'm in Atlanta at Emory University in Oxford, where we're beginning the same type of work. Oxford College, founded in the early 1830s, I think it was. While it was a Methodist college, and the Methodists were not supporters of slavery, yet those who founded and worked at the college were owners of slaves just the same. And as part of that consortium, as part of its work moving forward, the university is seeking to memorialize in some way those who, members of the enslaved, who helped build and operate and maintain this college. Emory University in Atlanta came out of Oxford College, and that is a subsequent conversation about the dispossession of lands from the indigenous, the sites where Emory now sits in Atlanta. So this work is just beginning, and we will have dialogues continuing. I was pointing out to someone today in a session we had with the descendant community that, you know, I've seen it on television, but I've never experienced being in a room with a descendant of an enslaver and a descendant of the woman who was enslaved by the enslaver, that these two people were in the same space together, having a very open and honest conversation about how to move forward. Here in Oxford, Georgia, I am continually blown away by the persistence of goodness in humans. So now I should just talk about William Mary. So this is a project that's currently under construction. Take a minute, and if you would just see the list before you. So when we started this work, the research had identified, I think it's just over 100 enslaved persons, both named and unnamed, and God only knows how many unknown through records. And I think we are at this point of construction up to 187 names, and the research continues. In, I don't remember the year, the Lemon Project was begun at William and Mary really by a student-led effort to recognize William and Mary's history with enslavement and the role that it played. And through that project, it led to it was 2018, late 2018 or 2019, an ideas competition. And there's a young man named Wilson Sender, who is an alumna of William and Mary, who won the competition with a concept of a project that he called Hearth. All right, so pursuant to that ideas competition, then the William and Mary put out an RFP for professional design services to execute on this idea. And that's what brought us to the table with William and Mary. The Hearth is intentionally located atop a wall that separates historic campus of William and Mary from the rest of it. The wall itself was a construct in the 1930s by the Rockefeller family in support of the historic reclamation of the campus in Williamsburg. And I think going back to this idea of how things are seen, the way they are seen, and this idea of the old way of seeing is what I think this idea of historic reclamation was about. Right? This is, and so this idea that this project would break down that separation, would literally remove that distinction between the enslaved and the enslaver by sitting atop that wall that separated was the idea. And that the relationship with the Wren building and historic campus would be about understanding those 187 plus names of the known and unknown and unnamed that are part of this campus, and then looking forward to whatever the future is. All right, starting with the idea that the Legacy Tribute Garden at Jefferson Hall is a recognition of the first African-American students, residents at William and Mary, and graduates. When we started the project, there were, the things that you would expect, right? The architects, structural engineers, lighting designer. We also have a poet and a writer on our team named Tony Wynn. I think the idea that we own the story and the storytelling at this point is important. Not only here, of course, but just as we move forward in this space. I think the one of the things that we presented early on was this painting. You see on the upper left, it's called Washington's Kitchen in Mount Vernon, 1864. And it's an enslaved woman and 3 kids in front of this fireplace. And with the idea of the hearth, there was a concern expressed on the client side that are we romanticizing this history of slavery? And I think that this painting sort of illustrated the juxtaposition of that idea of romanticizing it, because this woman is an enslaved woman who is at service doing something for someone else, and then has to, who knows, do what beyond. So we can reframe this in a way that makes sense, working with a poet and a writer and a lighting designer and a structural engineer and an architect, I think. So one of the things that is important, I think, to us is the reestablishment of generational identity. We talk about generational wealth, right? I mean, understanding that sort of for immigrants, people of color, forced into this country, that there is a loss of generational wealth, obviously. There's clearly also a loss of generational identity, right? Those completely unnamed and unknown people that you saw will never be known. They will never, ever be known. So what can we do to try to reestablish that? And while it may feel artificial to some, I think if we reach deep enough, it can become more authentic to most. So even just looking at the idea that once we started to design this idea of this hearth, even just the patterning of the brick. I know we did a presentation on this once, and I think somebody asked why it did not have a more classical nature or form, which I found to be an odd question, in that something built to recognize those who were enslaved and lost would take the form of the enslaver seemed odd. So anyway, how do we start to build a different architectural identity? I don't know. It's a start. At the same time, I was also asked, is there a Black architecture? Yeah, maybe, I guess. I don't know. There is, there isn't. But that's why you're all here. Gonna work it out. So part of telling the story at the William and Mary also involved us sort of expanding this concept to be certainly a space of education, a space of activity. For example, I think I'm going to announce it as a Black Student Union, but they were saying, this, for those of you who are Greek knowledgeable, would be a place of stepping, or right when that happens. They also have a ceremony during graduation that would happen here, and then just that it becomes a place to learn those histories that I talked about that seem to be less known than I thought they would be. This is a rendering of where we will end up. The concrete forms have just been stripped, so those two large concrete arches have just been revealed, and they look awesome. And so the project should be finished by this spring. And I think Juneteenth celebration is the goal. So stay tuned. So that's William and Mary currently. And the conversations are always about adding, what does it mean to add context? What does it mean to contextualize something? And I loved this image to sort of explain that if you know New York and Wall Street, the Charging Bull as an icon in the landscape of Wall Street, right? And representing just sort of this idea of the bull market and the strength of the financial market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this Fearless Girl sculpture added, set right in front, changed completely what this sculpture meant without touching it. That was powerful. That was a powerful move. And I think one of the most powerful things in that same way was how the Lee Monument was contextualized during that summer of unrest, right? Without removing it. And I will say that I was a fan of giving it a minute to think about how we contextualized it before we removed it, because this showed us so much that it was possible after years of trying to figure out how to add context, how to add signs, how to add a complete history. So that's where I am. That's a little bit of a snapshot of the work I've been doing and where I am. And there's a couple of quotes that are like, this one's currently my favorite. Maya Angelou just, yeah, knows how to turn the phrase. So that's what I got for you. Happy to chat a little more, take a question. Sorry about the snafu at the beginning, but.
Let me chime in here and open the floor for questions of Burt and his work. I have a couple to start things off. You came from Tuskegee, Alabama, right?
Yep.
And I happen to be on the board that approved Tuskegee's architecture school way back when Richard Franklin was the head of the School of Architecture there. Have you been back to Tuskegee to see any of the changes that happened? And maybe you can share with the group what those changes are.
I have been back a lot, and in fact, we'll probably be going back in a few weeks or so. But Tuskegee has reached a challenging point. And I say it also in the context of its relationship with the town, Tuskegee University, with the city of Tuskegee, it's dying on the vine, all of it. If you just look at the census numbers, it goes from 12,000 in 2010 to 10,000 in 2020, and is expected to be down to about 8,000. So it is literally sort of disappearing before our very eyes. The hospital that I was born in on the campus of Tuskegee is no longer. There is no longer a hospital in the city. It's historically Black college and this incredibly historic town have become a personal pet project of my family. I have 3 older brothers and a sister, and we've actually created a project to see what we can do to help reimagine Tuskegee. The physical beauty of the university is still there. It's right there. And I in other talks will show, for example, the chapel at Tuskegee, Brian Rudolph and Brian Welch, as an inspiration of some sort, even when I didn't know what architecture was. I was just a little kid running around a very cool building because the chaplain said, "Yeah, just run, just don't scream really loud. It's all cool." You know, that was really, really nice. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, especially now, right, to reverse some things. And Charlotte Perkins, the new president, I think, has the right tenor. Sorry, that might have been a whole lot more than we want. But the idea that this was a university built by hands, built by the Black hands which it served, is amazing, right? Wow, just imagine if your kids had to build a university that they wanted to go to before they could go there. Just think about that, man. And the other, sorry, too many. Booker T. Washington's unveiling, lifting the veil of ignorance on the campus there, is a contemporary of, I think it's Stonewall Jackson monument that was on Monument Avenue. I mean, they are both in the same time. Anyway. I'll stop there. Oh, now you're still on mute there, Ken.
Rather than to monopolize the time, I'll let other folks who have questions go ahead and ask them. And I've got a couple of others about this project and maybe the relationship, not being in Virginia for terribly long. I've just got questions about how things were done here and how they might be done in the future. So anybody else with questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
So you were talking about the monument you're designing and how you got a question of like why the monument isn't classical or classical in theme. And I've been kind of asking that question to myself like lately. How do we design spaces that are authentically ours without necessarily people asking the question, why can't it be like this or why can't it be that? So what does it mean to you, who's principal at a firm, who's Black, who are making these larger decisions? How do you design something that is authentically ours, but it's still given to like the public for use? And what does that mean for you in your career? Or what does that mean in terms of criticism and things like that?
That's a great question. I'm going to put it in our most recent project award, which will be the next Supreme Court of Virginia. And I think the question starts out with, what does it mean to be the courts, the sort of highest court of the Commonwealth, and who does it serve? So this idea of this Acropolis, this idea of that building on a planet separated from its people because it sits higher above, is arcane, and is not truly representative of who we are today. So it's not about questioning necessarily the aesthetic of something, it's questioning its relationship to what it's intended to do, who it's intended to serve, and not only what those aesthetic impacts look like, but literally the physical impact of space. I know we talk about it as designers, but when we talk about it as one of the people on our team, an ADA consultant, is literally a guy who has been in a wheelchair his entire life. He has a perspective on the Americans with Disability Act and what it means to be in accessible space that no other person can have. Bringing that kind of insight, whether it's a person that is physically challenged, whether it's a person of color, whether it's an immigrant, is what is needed, right? And I think framing that truly from that perspective is independent of an aesthetic, but brings an authentic response. So that, I mean, that's not a complete answer to your question, but I think it's a path forward for identifying what it should be.
Thank you.
Let me chime in here. You spoke about whether there is such a thing as Black architecture, and I think there's plenty of evidence around to substantiate that there is a vernacular, if you will, that is Black architecture. You could see it in Phil Freelon and David Ajayi's African American History Museum on the Mall, and there are others. Read about David Hughes's work on African architecture and the influence of African architecture on American architecture, and there are materials, there are colors, there are symbols, icons that when used together sort of frame this language of Black architecture. And I think doing something in a classical way is not respectful of what it ought to be. If it's to tell the story, our story, not his story, about what, where we came from, what our experiences were, like you say, person in a wheelchair speaking to ADA, we are the spokespersons for that type of architecture, and it needs to come from the homeland where our roots are. So I just add that.
Yeah, it's all in that quest to reestablish again that generational identity within the built environment that we serve and we service for us. So.
I think, sorry. I was going to say that to me, Black architecture, I see it in students. I think if you look at some of the design competitions, I know on the national level, the NOMA design competitions, and I've talked with Ian some about this, but there is clearly a way, an approach, a way of expressing that that is in them, and it's untouched by the industry, by conventions. I think we were saying it's almost like a Coltrane or a Miles Davis looking at music and seeing it completely differently. And the problem is that there's not a consumer for Black architecture right now. And that's just the thing where that's what we really have to build. Because, for example, if I'm Coltrane, all I need is a nice bar to go in and play it, and eventually people will get it. And the next thing you know, you have American classical music, a beautiful, powerful thing that has intellectual power, and that's fully expressive and all of those things. But I think it expresses the position of the Black person, I think, which is we're sort of on the outside looking in instead of on the inside looking out. And there is a creative freedom that is inherent in being outside of the box. So the trick is, how do we create a pathway for that expression to happen without being sort of pressed into the mold of the tradition? So recently we were looking at going after a project. We ended up not thinking about that, but one of the things I was saying, well, let's go get these guys who are really, really good. They've done, competitions like some of the NOMA thing. Let's go get those guys that have that knack for that expression and put them on the design team. Pay them like that. And I think that might be one way to start to make that connection and have a consumer for quote unquote Black architecture that can allow it to flourish like jazz did. Eventually there was an audience, and unfortunately now we see there's less of an audience for jazz. But the golden age of that was, it was an organic thing, but there was a market for it. There was a place for it.
I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I think there's a question of there is an aesthetic that we talk about, but then there is what is the cultural responsiveness that needs to happen, because I think the definition not only sort of looks back, but looks forward as in, and so if we look at our current culture and what it needs, what is our architectural response to that, right? And I think that in and of itself becomes a definition of an architecture designed for and by a people of color. I don't know what it is exactly, but I know it's needed. So I
think we've hit on kind of the two elephants in the room. You know, one is
that's a big room, man.
You know, on the one hand, you have the need to do something that's appropriate, that solves the needs of a culture and represents that sort of functional sort of role of architecture as a supporter of the culture. And then on the other hand, you have, how do you approach solving those issues that define it being functional and define it as filling that role in a culture? How do you do that in a unique way as a Black person? So, and I don't think that we should be trying to find out how to be unique. we need to are and how that impacts how we look at things.
Yeah. So
can I play a little bit of devil's advocate here and say, or ask the question of, what exactly is Black architecture? How do you define it, right?
Yeah, that's a question. I mean, certainly it's not, you know, if you were even going to try and find, it's not a monolith, but I think I come from a place of our how do I say this? Our traditional responses to architecture, and I don't mean traditional format, but I mean the way that we respond to architecture has clearly been completely influenced from a Eurocentric standpoint, you know, if, you know, whatever point you want to look at it, and, you know, for the most part. And so what is the architecture for us that moves forward from that? That's not a pastiche. That's not a, again, it's not an aesthetic, but it is something that is responsive to a different cultural need. And I think the challenge is, as I was saying, so there is a lack of cohesive, contiguous generational identity of particularly African Americans in this country, right? So that's why it's not a monolith. And there's big missing chunks of what it means to be African American in this country. So that's why I don't know how you necessarily move it forward or define it, or even if it's called that. You know, at one point you just want architecture to be architecture, and there's not Black, white, Latino, or any, it's just architecture. But that's for another day. My students are walking into this session, so I'm gonna have to say thank you.
Thank you.
Burt, for your comments and your presentation. In my mind, it was outstanding in that it gave us an insight into what architecture could be if given the freedom to express yourself in a way that's consistent with we as Americans. Some of that backwards to our history, but hopefully goes forward in terms of materials and the way you use them and the way they're presented. And I'd just like to say thank you. Next month we'll have another spotlight. And hopefully it will be as good as this one was. And I'd just like to thank everybody for coming, and we hope to see you next month. We'll issue something, everybody will be alerted. So thanks for coming, everybody.
And wait, don't send everybody off yet, Ken. Bert, if you need to peel off, you can, but I wanted to
Thank you.
thank you so much. It was phenomenal.
First got to go, but go ahead.
Yeah, so before everybody jumps off the call, just wanted to share out some upcoming events from VANOMA as well as our NOMAS chapters across the state. First up here, we have a portfolio and resume workshop coming up at Virginia Tech. This is in anticipation of their large career fair happening at the end of the month on the 28th. So on February 23rd, they are hosting a portfolio and resume workshop for their students. And if you're interested in wanting to help review those, please reach out to Aria Hill at vt.edu, and she can help get you connected with those students. Next up, want to put a plug in for VANOMA's next event, which will be our 4th of 4 in-person open houses. This one will be taking place at VMDO in Charlottesville, Virginia. So we're looking forward to that and hope that folks in that region can come visit with us, get to meet us, and talk about what we have planned for the remainder of the year. And then lastly here, there's another portfolio review coming up in March, on March 4th, and there's more information forthcoming, but that will be at JMU in Harrisonburg. And if you or someone you know you think would be a good topic for future spotlights, feel free to reach out to us at info.vanoma@gmail.com. We're always willing to hear what you want to learn more about and hear more about. So feel free to share your ideas with us directly, and also to follow us on social media to keep up with our current happenings. And then last but not least, just want to send a huge thank you and shout out to all of our great and phenomenal sponsors that make VANOMA possible. And that's it. That's all I got.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for enlightening us on what's coming and showing us the sponsors who we have to credit for making a lot of this happen and possible. So if your firm or organization wants to be a part of VANOMA, you have the contact information to get a hold of us, and we'd be happy to add your firm or organization to our list of sponsors. But at the very least, consider joining VANOMA and NOMA in general, and be a part of the future of architecture in the realm of minority architecture. So with that, Kelly, is there anything else?
Nope, that's all. I just thank everybody so much for coming and attending this evening for our conversation.
All right, with that, we'll say good night and God bless.